Further debate. Gentleman from District 24.
Mr. Speaker, the House, I rise in support of the bill before us. It's interesting, I had some prepared notes, and I will get to some of those, but one of the things was passed out by the good representative from District 23 referenced Colonel David Crockett. It's interesting that that should be handed out today because one of the very first votes I ever made as an elected official was a no vote on a bill that I stood alone on a much smaller body. And I had not heard of this story, but I was complimented by a citizen, sent this to me and saying, you know, you stood strong and courageous. So today maybe I've gone full circle because I see Davy Crockett's before me again on probably my first difficult vote in this body. You know, we've been listening to a lot of voices today, ladies and gentlemen, of this great body. There's one common theme. We aren't too trustful of the federal government running Obamacare in our exchange. And many of us hope that the court actions in Oklahoma will rule this as unconstitutional. But we're not here today to discuss the magnitude of the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, but here to state and address about the health exchange. The choice we have before us is we can do nothing with a no vote, which is a default to the federally managed Idaho Health Exchange, or expand the state government with an expanded state agency, which has been suggested here today, but I think if it were before us, most of the people suggesting it would be appalled to vote for such an idea. Or establish a state-created independent nonprofit exchange. The bill before us does that by establishing this corporate body politic to manage the exchange. Is it independent? Yes. Does it have oversight? It has more oversight than we'll see with a federal exchange. Could it have more oversight? Maybe, but that's part of the opportunity to have an independent body. I have found myself seeking advice for months, and I've found myself changing my position on this over the past year. And we've been in session here now, I see, 66 days. It was about a month ago when I determined I had to take a stand, make a choice, and that was not very easy. Like many in this body, I had the confidence that one of two events would bring this decision to a close. One was a presidential election that which did not go in the direction I had hoped for, but I did work very hard to influence that outcome. Then I relied on the wisdom of the Supreme Court to rule that the Affordable Care Act was unconstitutional. While some aspects of the Affordable Care Act were declared unconstitutional, many of the provisions and the ones we're dealing with today were upheld by a 5-4 vote. Many were again critical of the decision that was made by the Supreme Court and some feeling betrayed. Yet many people still rely on parts of the opinion as though they're words of enlightenment. The Court's decision on the Medicaid expansion was one of the small victories in the constitutional challenge, but left much of the ACA as the law of the land, including this health exchange we're debating today. So who should manage that exchange? That is the question before us. So now we're left with a decision. What is in the best interest of the people of Idaho, the economy of Idaho, and accordingly our respective districts? Today, a no will default us, and I think will do great damage to Idaho's economy. We are not here to decide if there will be an exchange. In fact, those in opposition of this bill encourage us to default to a federal exchange. So the fact there will be an exchange is probably one thing we all agree with. While many feel that the Obamacare will collapse under the weight and cost of a federal exchange, I cannot accept that premise. The federal government has grown exponentially without an exchange. To accept the premise that deferring the management of the Idaho exchange will overburden the bureaucracy is unrealistic. There are many examples of Big Brother setting up huge bureaucracies that find ways to spend us into oblivion. The federal government can and will fill that void and build the federal exchange one step closer to a single provider. What little control of the benefits and or consumer costs that we can exert, we must. Doing nothing on the assumption that the federal government cannot deliver an exchange is leaving our citizens with a program designed by Washington, managed by Washington, and sending all our fees to Washington. In the past few days, the tone has changed to imply that if one supports a state-managed exchange, you must not be pro-life. This is an unbelievable assertion. In fact, if I can influence the management of the exchange to protect the life of the unborn for 1 day, or 1 month, or 1 year, or what remains of my life, I choose to trust Idahoans to make those decisions. If some federal law or rule is promulgated that the Idaho Exchange will mandate a change that is adverse to my personal values or yours, I would rather have an independent Idaho Exchange managed by Idahoans, monitored by the Idaho legislature to stand up to the federal government than have the federal exchange not answerable to the people of Idaho. If Idaho feels the Affordable Care Act has breached our values, I want the full faith and force of the Idaho legislature, the gentleman on the second floor, and our Attorney General fighting for us. This bill creates an independent, not-for-profit corporate body politic authorized by the state of Idaho. Thus, it is not an agency of the state, but independent. The federal government will provide funds necessary to establish the exchange, and the ongoing operations must be funded by the fees associated with that exchange. Opponents often state that it will cost the state $10 million per year. The exchange will have cost. However, the independent exchange must establish a business model to operate within the fee structure of the exchange. User fees, not general revenue funding. The fees to use Idaho Independent Exchange should be lower to Idaho than a federal managed exchange at 3.5%. The independent exchange fees are anticipated to be lower, maybe 25 to 50% lower. The new bill assures legislative oversight of this independent exchange. It establishes an implementation timeline that will adjust if the timelines from the federal government are also adjusted. And it insulates Idaho taxpayers from financial risks of the exchange. An independent exchange will have a board of directors appointed by the governor with voting members from the legislature. Mandatory reporting changes in fees or policies will allow the legislature to closely monitor any adverse directions the exchange might consider. There will be a health insurance exchange. I have no doubt about that. I believe an independent exchange for Idaho will provide input on everything from which carriers, agents, and quality of service, imprinting Idaho's conservative values on the benefits, especially in areas that invade one's personal religious beliefs and values. This alternative approach, an independent exchange managed by Idahoans, will insulate us from the financial liability and provide management oversight of an exchange. I will be supporting states' rights, Idaho values, Idaho's economy, pro-life interest, and maximum flexibility with my yes vote on House Bill 248. Thank you.